Section 434 is the issuance of the Treasury dollar bills themselves. And I guess I just want to talk about this for a second. It's like, how can we issue money without debt? Somebody asked me earlier, doesn't there have to be a liability for every asset? If we put these assets on the books, where's the liability? And no, there doesn't have to be a liability for every asset. You can think of this in a number of ways, right? If you find a hunk of gold on the ground, it's just an asset. There's no liability on anyone else's part. We can do this as a thought experiment. The Treasury could print $1,300 bills and mail one of them out to every adult every month, and they would just be creating assets. Everyone would have this asset of a $1,300 bill, but there would be no corresponding liability recorded on the books. We can create assets. It's just a matter of bookkeeping. And in order to keep the financial system stable, we should. You might have heard of a similar proposal relating to a platinum coin as a way to pay off the debt or fund other things, where the Treasury could mint $1 trillion platinum coin and then deposit it in the Federal Reserve Bank and for $1 trillion credit. It just demonstrates that bookkeeping it's how we choose to record these numbers in spreadsheets or on pieces of paper or however. We can record them however we choose. Congress has that authority under the Constitution to create money, to create assets, add money to the economy directly. And so that's what Section 434 does. It gives the framework for issuing these Treasury dollar bills. So what it does is it introduces a new section into the U.S. Code that relates to the U.S. Code that already deals with Treasury bills or T-bills, as they're sometimes called. And T-bills are short-term notes. They're sold at less than face value, and then within a few weeks or a few months, you can redeem them at face value. T-bills are only available in digital form, not paper, and they're issued whenever there's they have an auction and when there's buyers. And Treasury dollar bills are different. And paragraph 1 spells out the way. So let me share my screen again. Over here on the left, the issuance of Treasury dollar bills. The Secretary shall issue on the credit of the United States Treasury dollar bills as provided by paragraph 3. And this is the same verbiage from the Greenback, the Legal Tender Acts Abraham Lincoln used back in 1860, 61, 62. So here's how the Treasury dollar bills work. Whenever they are issued, they will be recorded as an asset among the digital Treasury accounts authorized by paragraphs B1 and B2 of the previous section. So the only way that they can be recorded as an asset is if they are recorded in those accounts as part of the American Union Jobs Program. Treasury dollar bills will be interest-free. They won't expire like existing T-bills do. They are just dollars worth one Federal Reserve notes, and again, issued as digital dollars and the unit of account for digital Treasury accounts. Paragraph 2 clarifies a few more details, some of which we've already seen, that they are legal tender, receivable in payment for all taxes, duties, debts, demands of every kind in the United States. It clarifies that they can be in fractional amounts. It doesn't have to be, T-bills are sold in $100 denominations, but Treasury dollar bills can be, in dollars and fractions, cents. And then paragraph D clarifies that these digital dollars can always be exchanged for Federal Reserve notes or payable on demand in Federal Reserve notes. And so if you want to spend your UBI anonymously, then you can go to the post office, take money out of the ATM and spend it. Treasury dollar bills are like T-bills. They are only available in digital form. Not change the type of currency that you see circulating, will not change the physical money that we circulate. This is a digital currency only. It's probably worth emphasizing that this is not a cryptocurrency. This is a central bank digital currency. The U.S. Treasury will keep one ledger, records transactions, account balances, things like that, as opposed to a cryptocurrency that copies the ledger and then makes lots and lots and lots of copies of it everywhere. That's unnecessarily inefficient and a central bank digital currency can overcome that. Paragraph 3, this is the part where we limit the issuance of Treasury dollar bills. Remember in paragraph 1, we said they can only go to B1 and B2 accounts. And so there are two programs that they'll be able to do it. And this will be statutorily limited. There's always the fear mongering whenever we talk about government printing money, is that the government they have the power to create money, they'll abuse it. And again, so that's why we write it into the law. There's very clear limits. The two programs that they can do are the American Union Jobs Program. This is the universal basic income. We're going to talk more about Thursday. $15,600 a year for adults plus $5,200 a year for kids. And the other way that they can issue Treasury dollar bills to American citizens is through the voluntary value sharing. We'll talk about that next week with the value-added tax, but it's where companies can pay down the national debt, and that amount be reissued as Treasury dollar bills and issued once a year as sort of a year-end bonus in December, where every American gets a share. Again, this $30 trillion that we have as a national debt isn't supposed to be paid back. It's under our current system. It's just an excuse to pay hundreds of billions of dollars in interest every year. And with using Treasury dollar bills, we don't need to have that much money borrowed. We can pay it down, and to keep that money in circulation, give it back to the American citizens who are its rightful owners. So that's what subparagraph A does. Subparagraph B, Congress makes the laws, right? So if we write the law that says Congress can only do these, the Treasury can only do these certain things, Congress can change it. And so subsections B and C are the lockbox that we put this in. Subsection B, this is the same language we used around the truce for guns and abortion. We block Congress from considering anything that would go around paragraph 3 or would allow the Treasury to issue it for any other purpose except what's explicitly spelled out in paragraph 3. The only way that the Treasury can issue these is to Americans in the B1 and B2 accounts. And then to make sure that Congress doesn't change that section of law, we have subsection C that restricts Congress from amending anything in section 434 or these new provisions relating to Treasury dollar bills, unless they have a two-thirds vote in the House and the Senate on a roll call vote and a quorum being present. So if they want to change the law, ultimately they have the authority to do so, but we can statutorily put roadblocks in their way. And we can do this because the Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, says that each House may determine the rules of its proceedings. And so if Congress agrees to this, if Congress passes this rule that says these things can't be considered, then that's perfectly constitutional. This is what they did in December 2021. If you remember, I talked about Section 221. They raised the debt ceiling by passing a law that changed the Senate rules. So we can do the same thing here. One of the analogies I like to think of is, maybe you've heard this financial advice of, you can take your credit card and freeze it in a block of ice, and that'll stop you from making reckless purchases. Congress has America's credit cards. That's the Constitution is very clear on that. But when it comes to Treasury dollar bills, we can freeze them. We can essentially freeze them in a block of ice. So it will take a sincere effort for Congress to use them for reckless spending. And the last subsection says that the effective date of section A is 12:01 a.m. on the launch date. The locking language of subsections B and C, it snaps into place passage. That's how Treasury dollar bills would be issued, and how we can restrict the government from spending them out of control or issuing them in any other way besides the American people. And with that, Mr. Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for section 434. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you. What about the Federal Reserve? How will they interact with the Treasury performing basic banking functions?
So this legislation doesn't get rid of the Federal Reserve. If you're looking to abolish the Fed, or end the Fed, that's not what this bill does. but it makes it less, I guess I want to say less relevant, because right now the Federal Reserve, I guess, so if you think about the economy as being a boat on a river, that growth, makes the river flow. And the Federal Reserve has, their tools are a set of oars. And so Treasury dollar bills would be like a small, steady motor. The Federal Reserve they could paddle forwards and backwards. They could steer with their oars. Maybe the motor takes care of the work and they can relax. They don't have to micromanage the economy. The Federal Reserve's main tool is interest rates. And you can only, when you get them down to zero, you've jammed the accelerator to the mat, and there's not much else you can do. And so by using Treasury dollar bills to add money to the economy automatically, that will let the Federal Reserve, take its foot off the gas and use interest rates to, still be able to use interest rates to steer the economy, but it won't have to persuade people to borrow so much money in order to grow the money supply. If you look back at what the Federal Reserve did with interest rates for the last decade or so, and same thing in Europe with their central bank, is they kept their interest rates real low, but they weren't able to meet their inflation targets. They couldn't persuade people to borrow enough money at low interest rates. And so that's because we're doing money backwards to try and persuade people to borrow it into existence when we should just issue it directly. So that's the Federal Reserve still exists, still does its thing, but it won't be necessary for the Federal Reserve to add as much money to the economy because the Treasury will do that already.
Thank you. I do have a concern, and this is kind of more general to Blueprint, but I think it's especially relevant when we start talking about this freezing the credit card in a block of ice, like putting up these roadblocks, which is, okay, so the overall concept is we have the specific legislative package that we want to be voted into law. But let's say the American Union gets all these representatives into Congress and they say, yeah, we're going to do it. And then they go in and they make a bunch of little tweaks before passing it. Obviously, we might vote them out the next time around, but it's difficult depending on just how many tweaks they make. This is already a compromise bill in the first place. And if you have these kind of provisions that freeze things in place, but they go in and they tweak very key things that make it not so great, then those are frozen in place. So it's kind of this question of, I know we're talking about a block of ice, but are we playing with fire a little? Are we getting a little too aggressive, too much? Are we going too close, flying too close to the sun here? Like what is the moderation on this, and is this really the right approach?
So that's a good question, and I guess I should clarify that these restrictions, putting this on a block of ice, this is only relative to Treasury dollar bills. Congress can still borrow more money through the Federal Reserve. They can still borrow more money. They just can't create it directly. And so this legislation will open up the possibility for them to Treasury dollar bills to have a balanced budget, but they would still be able to borrow more money. They just couldn't create it directly. As to your larger question of what happens if Congress says, yeah, we'll pass it, and then they, make amendments afterwards. It's a possibility, but that's the point of this new political paradigm of turning it around and getting candidates for federal office to agree to specific terms, specific legislation for the election, so that in the best case scenario is that the incumbents will enact this prior to the midterm elections and get reelected in a landslide, go down in history as the Congress that ended poverty, ended mass incarceration, and ended the endless wars. If we end up having to replace some of them and elect them, then there's a little more trust involved. Politicians don't always have a great reputation for being trustworthy. I think they're right up there with car salesmen and lawyers. But the model is set up so that the candidates for federal office have a chance to see and read this legislation and know exactly what it is that they're agreeing to. And if they give their word that they will support it, then they'll be expected to follow through.